The December wind howled through the narrow canyon pass, carrying with it the bitter promise of an early winter. Captain Samuel Morrison stood at the edge of Fort Defiance, his weathered hands gripping the wooden railing as he watched the sun sink behind the jagged peaks of the Arizona Territory. The year was 1887, and the frontier had grown weary of bloodshed. "You certain about this arrangement, Captain?" Lieutenant Thomas Brennan asked, shifting uncomfortably in his worn blue uniform. The younger man's face bore the uncertainty of someone who'd seen too much violence between the Apache and the settlers to believe in peaceful solutions. Morrison spat tobacco juice into the dust. "The Apache warrior controls that pass. Without it, our supply lines are cut come spring. He wants a bride. We give him one. Simple as that." The deal had been struck a month prior through intermediaries, traders who still maintained tentative connections with the scattered remnants of Apache bands. The warrior, known only as Taza Redhawk, held strategic ground in the mountains between Arizona and New Mexico. He'd agreed to allow safe passage for supply wagons in exchange for provisions, grain, horses, blankets, and most unusually, a white bride, in the ramshackle town of Bitter Creek, 20 miles from the fort. The townspeople had gathered in the church to discuss their predicament. The community was poor, devastated by drought and raids, hanging on by mere threads of hope and stubborn determination. "We need those supply routes open," Mayor Josiah Whitman declared from the pulpit, his voice carrying over the murmur of worried voices. "Without them, we'll starve come spring." The proposal was as distasteful as it was desperate. Pool their meager resources to provide a dowry for one of their daughters to marry the Apache warrior. The room erupted in protests, mothers clutching their young daughters closer, fathers standing with clenched fists. It was then that Clara Whitmore rose from the back pew, her black widow's dress still bearing the ash stains from the fire that had claimed her life 3 months prior. At 26, she moved with the hollow grace of someone who had already died, but whose body hadn't yet realized it. "I'll go," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. The church fell silent. Martha Patterson, the minister's wife, gasped. "Clara, you can't possibly—" "I have no one left," Clara interrupted, her gray eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the church walls. "No family, no home, nothing holding me here except ghosts and guilt. Let me do this one thing right." The fire that had consumed her small homestead had taken everything. Her husband, Daniel, a kind but struggling farmer, and their 4-year-old daughter, Emma. Clara had been at the general store when it happened, trading eggs for flour. By the time she'd seen the smoke and raced back, there was nothing left but charred timber and 2 graves to dig. The town had whispered. Of course, some said it was Apache raiders. Others blamed a knocked-over lantern. But Clara knew the truth. Daniel had been drinking again, trying to forget their mounting debts. She should have been there, should have watched him more carefully, should have saved her baby girl. "The arrangement calls for a virgin bride," Mayor Whitman said uncomfortably, his face reddening. "The Apache was quite specific." Clara's laugh was bitter as winter bark. "Then tell him what he needs to hear. I doubt he'll return me for damaged goods once the deal is done." 3 days later, Clara stood beside a covered wagon loaded with the promised supplies. She wore her best dress, a faded blue calico that had seen better days, and carried a small canvas bag containing her few remaining possessions, a silver hairbrush that had been her mother's, a worn Bible, and a small daguerreotype of Emma, her baby's sweet face frozen in time. The journey took 2 days through harsh terrain. The wagon driver, a grizzled man named Ezekiel who'd lost 3 fingers to frostbite, said little. The cavalry escort, 4 young soldiers who looked barely old enough to shave, rode with rifles ready, their eyes scanning the ridge lines for any sign of ambush. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the landscape transformed from desert scrub to pine forest. The trees grew twisted and gnarled, shaped by fierce winds and heavy snows. Ice crystals formed on Clara's eyelashes, and her breath came in visible puffs in the frigid air. "This is as far as we go," Ezekiel announced as they reached a narrow defile between 2 towering cliff faces. Ancient Apache symbols were carved into the rock, warnings or welcomes. Clara couldn't tell which. The soldiers helped unload the supplies, working quickly, eager to be gone before nightfall. Clara stood apart, her bag clutched in numb fingers, watching her last connections to civilization prepare to abandon her. "You sure about this, ma'am?" The youngest soldier, a boy with freckles and kind eyes, approached her. "It ain't too late to turn back." Clara shook her head. "I'm already dead. Soldier, this is just my body catching up." As the wagon and escort disappeared down the mountain path, Clara waited in the gathering darkness. The wind picked up, driving ice crystals against her exposed skin like tiny needles. She began to shiver, wondering if she would freeze to death before the Apache even arrived. Then she saw him. He materialized from the shadows of the forest like something born of the mountain itself. Tall and powerful, wrapped in a bearskin cloak, his face marked with the scars of survival and loss. Taza Redhawk moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his dark eyes taking in everything: the supplies, the woman, the fear she tried to hide. He said nothing, merely studied her with an intensity that made her want to step backward. His face was weathered but not old, perhaps 35 winters. With sharp cheekbones and a mouth set in a hard line, this was not a man who smiled easily or often. When he finally moved, it was to examine the supplies first, checking the grain sacks, counting the horses, testing the quality of the blankets. Only then did he turn his attention back to Clara, circling her slowly like a horse buyer examining potential stock. Clara lifted her chin, meeting his gaze defiantly. She would not cower. She had chosen this path, and she would walk it with what dignity remained to her. Taza stopped his circling and spoke a single word in accented English. "Come." He turned and began walking into the forest without looking back, clearly expecting her to follow. Clara grabbed her bag and hurried after him, struggling to keep pace as he led her deeper into the wilderness. The path, if it could be called that, was treacherous in the gathering darkness, winding between massive pines and over ice-slicked rocks. After what felt like hours but was probably less than one, they arrived at a small valley hidden deep in the mountains. A log cabin sat nestled among the trees, smoke rising from a stone chimney. It was roughly built but solid, designed to withstand the harsh mountain winters. Taza held the door open, gesturing for her to enter. The interior was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Bearskins covered the floor, and simple furniture hewn from pine filled the space. It smelled of wood smoke, leather, and something wild she couldn't name. As Clara stood uncertainly in the middle of the room, Taza studied her more closely in the firelight. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, or disappointment. He spoke again, his English careful and deliberate. "You are not maiden, you are widow." It wasn't a question. Clara's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "Does it matter?" His jaw tightened. "They lie to me. Send broken woman instead of pure bride." The word stung more than Clara expected. Broken, yes, that's what she was. "I volunteered," she said quietly. "No one else would come." Taza turned away, his powerful frame rigid with anger or disappointment, or both. He spoke rapidly in Apache, words she couldn't understand but whose meaning was clear. He had been deceived, given something less than promised. Clara set down her bag and removed her cloak, hanging it on a peg by the door. "I can cook, clean, work hard. I know I'm not what you wanted, but I'm here now." That has to count for something. He said nothing more that night, simply pointed to a corner where blankets had been laid out, far from where he would sleep. She noticed. Clara understood. She was not the virgin bride he'd bargained for, not the clean slate on which to rebuild his vanished bloodline. She was just another casualty of the frontier, a used and damaged thing trying to find purpose in exile. As she lay in the corner, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle in the hearth, Clara felt the weight of her choices settling over her like a burial shroud. Somewhere in these same mountains, her husband and daughter lay in hastily dug graves, and here she was, neither dead nor truly alive, bound to a stranger who already found her wanting. The tears came silently in the darkness, freezing on her cheeks in the cold mountain air. The first week passed in a rhythm of silence and survival. Clara woke each morning to find Taza already gone, out hunting or checking his trap lines before dawn broke over the mountain peaks. She would rise from her corner, her body stiff from the cold despite the layers of blankets, and set about learning the unfamiliar geography of her new existence. The cabin, she discovered, was more complex than it first appeared. A root cellar had been dug beneath the floor, stocked with preserved venison, wild onions, and clay jars of rendered bear fat. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, some she recognized as medicinal, others foreign to her. Everything had its place, arranged with a precision that spoke of long solitude and hard-won order. Fire was the first lesson, not the simple kitchen fires she'd tended in her former life, but the careful art of maintaining warmth in a place where cold could kill. The wood had to be chosen correctly: pine for quick heat, oak for long burning through the night. Too much smoke would reveal their location. Too little heat would mean frozen death before morning. Taza returned that first evening with a freshly killed rabbit. He skinned it with practiced efficiency, his knife moving in sure strokes. When Clara reached for the carcass to prepare it for cooking, he pulled it away, shaking his head. "Watch," he commanded, then demonstrated how to clean the meat properly, wasting nothing. Every organ had purpose. Every bone could be used. He showed her how to stretch the hide on a wooden frame, how to scrape it clean for later use. Clara watched intently, memorizing each movement. When he handed her his knife to try, she fumbled at first, her city-softened hands clumsy with the unfamiliar work, but she persisted, and by the third rabbit, she could clean it without his correction. They ate in silence, sitting on opposite sides of the fire. The meat was tough but flavorful, seasoned with wild herbs she couldn't name. Clara noticed how Taza ate slowly, savoring each bite as if food were precious, which, she supposed, it was here. Days blended together in a pattern of work and wordless coexistence. Clara learned to identify edible plants beneath the snow, to read the weather and the movement of clouds across the peaks, to move quietly enough not to startle the deer that sometimes passed near the cabin. Taza remained distant, treating her presence as one might tolerate an unwelcome but necessary animal. He slept near the fire while she remained in her corner. He spoke only when instruction was needed, reverting to Apache when frustrated with her mistakes. It was the cold that finally began to crack the wall between them. The temperature plummeted in the second week, bringing with it a brutal wind that found every gap in the cabin's construction. Clara woke one night to find her breath crystallizing in the air above her face. Despite every blanket she could pile on, shivers racked her body in violent waves. She tried to be quiet, not wanting to show weakness, but her teeth chattered audibly in the darkness. She heard Taza shift near the fire, heard him add more wood to the dying embers. The warmth didn't reach her corner. Pride warred with survival instinct. Pride lost. Clara gathered her blankets and crept closer to the fire, still maintaining distance from where Taza lay. She curled into a tight ball, trying to absorb whatever heat she could. Still, the shivering continued, her body unable to generate enough warmth to combat the mountain's bitter cold. She felt rather than heard Taza rise. His footsteps were silent on the wooden floor, but she sensed his approach. He stood over her for a long moment, and she wondered if he would send her back to her corner to freeze. Instead, he dropped an heavy bearskin over her, still warm from his own body heat. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Clara's eyes flew open to find him crouched beside her, his face unreadable in the firelight. "You die of cold. They blame me," he said gruffly, already turning away. "Thank you," Clara whispered, but he was already settling back into his own sleeping place, now with one less layer against the cold. The next morning brought a lesson in ice fishing. Taza led her to a small mountain lake, its surface frozen solid. He showed her how to cut through the ice with an iron spike, how to read the water below for signs of fish. how to wait with inhuman patience for a strike. Clara's hands went numb within minutes, but she forced herself to maintain her grip on the fishing line. When she finally pulled up her first trout, small but perfect, she couldn't suppress a small cry of triumph. For just a moment, she thought she saw approval flicker across Taza's weathered features. That night, as she cleaned the fish they'd caught, Clara found herself speaking into the customary silence. "My husband was a farmer," she said, not looking up from her work. "Daniel Whitmore, he was a good man, just lost sometimes. In the bottle, after the crops failed 2 years running." Taza said nothing, but she felt his attention shift to her. "My daughter Emma was 4, hair like corn silk, eyes like her father's, blue as summer sky." Clara's hands stilled on the fish. "The fire took them while I was at the store, trading eggs for flour. Such a simple thing, eggs for flour. If I'd been home." "Fire does not wait," Taza said quietly. It was the longest sentence he'd volunteered since her arrival. Clara looked up, surprised. His dark eyes held something that might have been understanding. "My people also burned," he continued, his voice low and rough. "Soldiers came at dawn. The old ones, the children, could not run fast enough." He touched a scar on his neck. "A bullet's path. I was hunting, came back to ash and bones." The similarity of their losses hung in the air between them. A bridge built of shared grief. "Is that why you wanted?" Clara couldn't finish the question. "Last of my blood," Taza said simply. "Need sons to carry the names of the dead. Need pure woman to wash away the blood." His jaw tightened. "They send me you instead." Another ghost. Clara felt tears threaten but forced them back. "I'm sorry, I'm not what you wanted." He studied her for a long moment. "You work hard. Do not complain. Maybe that is enough." It was the closest thing to acceptance she'd received, and Clara treasured it through the long, cold nights that followed. As November gave way to December, their routine evolved to include small conversations. Taza began teaching her words in Apache. Practical things at first: water, fire, danger, food. Clara reciprocated with stories of the world beyond the mountains, describing towns and trains and things he'd only heard of in passing. She learned that his name meant Red Hawk, given for the sacred bird that appeared at his birth. His father had been a war chief, his mother a medicine woman. He spoke of ceremonies and traditions with a reverence that made Clara ashamed of how little she knew of her own heritage beyond Sunday church services. The day she slipped on the ice changed everything. Clara had ventured out to check Taza's trap lines while he hunted larger game. The path was treacherous, winding along a steep cliff face where ice had formed in deadly sheets. She'd navigated it successfully twice before, but overconfidence proved her undoing. Her foot found a patch of black ice, invisible and unforgiving. The world tilted violently as she fell, her hands scrabbling desperately for purchase on the icy rock. For one terrifying moment, she hung suspended over a drop that would surely kill her, her fingers already numbing and losing their grip. Then Taza was there, appearing as suddenly as he had that first night, his hand locked around her wrist with crushing force, hauling her up and away from the edge in one powerful motion. They tumbled together onto solid ground, Clara landing hard against his chest. For a moment, neither moved. Clara could feel his heart beating rapidly beneath the leather shirt, could smell the mixture of smoke and pine and something uniquely him. His arms remained around her, as if he'd forgotten to let go. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Taza's hand came up to touch her face, perhaps to check for injury, but his fingers lingered against her cold, flushed cheek. Clara found herself leaning into the touch, starved for human contact after so much careful distance. The moment shattered as Taza pulled away abruptly, setting her aside and standing in one fluid motion. But his hands shook slightly as he checked her over for injuries, and his voice was rougher than usual when he scolded her for taking such risks. That night, Clara made a decision. Instead of retreating to her corner after dinner, She settled beside the fire where Taza sat working on a new bowstring. He tensed, but didn't send her away. "Tell me about your wife," she said softly. "The one who should have come." Taza's hand stilled. "No wife, just hope for wife, for future. But you must have loved someone before the soldiers came." A long silence. Then, "Morning Star, that was her name. Married 2 seasons before the burning." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Carried our first child. Almost time for birth when—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Clara reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed her hand over his. He flinched, but didn't withdraw. "I'm sorry," she said. "For your morning star. For your child. For not being what you need me to be." Taza turned his hand palm up, his fingers closing briefly around hers before pulling away. "You are here. That is something." It was, Clara realized, more than either of them had had in months. And for now, perhaps it was enough. The blizzard arrived without warning on a December afternoon, transforming the mountain world into a howling white void. Clara had been gathering kindling near the cabin when the first winds hit, nearly knocking her off her feet. Within minutes, visibility dropped to mere inches as snow drove horizontally through the air like frozen needles. She stumbled toward where she thought the cabin door should be, but the world had become a directionless maze of white. Panic clawed at her throat as she realized she could no longer see the structure that was surely only yards away. The cold was already seeping through her clothes, her fingers going numb inside her mittens. "Taza!" She screamed, but the wind tore the word from her lips, carrying it away into nothingness. Then strong hands caught her shoulders, and she was pulled against a solid chest. Taza had tied a rope around his waist, the other end secured to the cabin door. He guided her back through the blinding storm, his body shielding hers from the worst of the wind's assault. Once inside, he barred the door against the storm's fury and immediately began piling wood onto the fire. Clara stood shivering violently, her clothes already stiffening with ice. Without a word, Taza began pulling at her frozen outer garments, his movements brusque but efficient. "Must warm you," he said when she tried to protest. "Frostbite comes quick." Her fingers were too numb to work the buttons, so she stood passive as he stripped away the ice-crusted layers. When she was down to her undergarments, he wrapped her in the bearskin from his own bed and pushed her close to the fire. The storm raged for 3 days. The wind screamed like a living thing, seeking entrance through every tiny gap. Snow piled against the door until it was completely blocked. Their world shrank to the confines of the cabin, lit only by firelight as the windows became walls of white. By the second night, Clara developed a fever. It started as simple chills she attributed to the cold, but soon she was burning hot and delirious. Her lungs rattled with each breath, and she drifted in and out of consciousness, lost in fever dreams where Emma called for her through walls of flame. Taza tended her with unexpected gentleness. He brewed tea from the dried herbs hanging from the rafters, supporting her head to help her drink when her fever spiked dangerously high. He stripped away the blankets despite her weak protests and bathed her burning skin with snow-cooled water. His hands were careful, clinical, but she sensed the worry in his movements. In her more lucid moments, Clara was aware of him maintaining constant vigil. He kept the fire burning high, melted snow for water, and spooned thin broth between her cracked lips. Once, she woke to find him singing softly in Apache, a low, rhythmic chant that seemed to hold back the darkness pressing at the edges of her vision. "Emma," she called out in her delirium, reaching for shadows. "Baby, where are you? Mama's coming." "Shh," Taza murmured, catching her flailing hands. "No Emma here, only Clara, only now." "The fire," Clara sobbed, tears streaming down her fevered cheeks. "I should have been there, should have saved them. Daniel was drinking again. I knew he was drinking, but I went anyway, for flour, just flour." Taza said nothing, just held her hands until the fever dream passed. On the third night, Clara's fever broke. She woke to find herself wrapped in every blanket and fur in the cabin, drenched in sweat but finally clear-headed. The storm still raged outside, but the sound had become almost soothing, a white noise that cocooned them from the world. Taza sat beside her, his face haggard with exhaustion. When he saw her eyes focus on him properly, relief flickered across his features. "You back," he said simply. "How long?" 3 days. Thought you might walk the spirit path." He handed her a cup of water, supporting her as she drank. "You called for them. Your family." Clara closed her eyes, shame washing over her. "I'm sorry." "No sorry. Fever brings truth." He was quiet for a moment. "I also called for my dead, after the burning, many nights." She looked at him then, really looked, saw the deep lines carved by loss, the way his shoulders carried invisible weight. They were both haunted, she realized, both trying to build something from ashes. "Will we starve?" Clara asked, suddenly aware of their situation. "The storm. Have food enough. I prepare for winter always." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Apache way. Expect worst, survive anything." The wind chose that moment to howl particularly fiercely, rattling the cabin walls. Clara shivered despite the warmth of the furs. "Cold still," Taza observed. He hesitated, then made a decision. Body heat best medicine. Before Clara could respond, he slid under the furs beside her, careful to maintain space between them, but his warmth radiated across the gap, and Clara found herself unconsciously shifting closer. When he didn't pull away, she let herself settle against his side, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder. They lay in silence, listening to the storm. Clara could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest, the strong beat of his heart. For the first time since the fire, she felt truly safe. "Tell me about Morningstar," she said softly. Taza was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she laughed like water over stones, always singing, even when working. "Made best fry bread in village." His voice carried both pain and tenderness. "Would have been good mother," already sang to baby inside her. "Emma loved songs too," Clara whispered. "Especially at bedtime. Black as the Color was her favorite. I sang it every night." Her voice caught. "I still hear it sometimes, in the wind." "Sing now," Taza said unexpectedly. I couldn't. Sing for Emma, for Morningstar, for all our ghosts." Clara's throat was tight with unshed tears, but she found herself humming the opening notes. Then, softly, the words came. "Black is the color of my true love's hair, his face so soft and wondrous fair." Her voice was rough from illness, barely above a whisper, but Taza listened with complete attention. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Good song," he finally said. "Teach me." So Clara taught him the melody, line by line, their voices joining awkwardly at first, then with growing harmony. It was strange and beautiful and heartbreaking, an Irish ballad sung in a mountain cabin while the blizzard raged, shared between two people who had lost everything except this moment. When exhaustion finally claimed Clara again, she slept without dreams for the first time since arriving at the cabin. She woke briefly in the deep night to find Taza still awake, standing guard against more than just the storm. "Sleep," she murmured. "I'm all right now." He looked down at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Slowly, as if fighting himself, he lay back down beside her. This time, when she curled against him, his arm came around her, holding her secure. "No more corner sleeping," he said quietly. "Too cold. Winter is long." Clara knew it wasn't really about the cold, but she simply nodded against his chest. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, but inside the cabin, something new was being born from shared warmth and mutual need. The next morning brought weak sunlight and a world transformed. Snow had drifted up to the windows, creating a cocoon of white that would take days to dig through. But the immediate danger had passed. Taza rose first, as always, building up the fire and checking their supplies. Clara watched him move about the cabin, noting how he favored his left shoulder, an old injury aggravated by the cold. She guessed. "Let me see," she said, sitting up carefully. He paused, then sat beside her, allowing her to examine the shoulder. An old scar ran across it, poorly healed. "Bullet?" she asked. "Arrow. From Crow Warrior. Many seasons past." He winced as she probed the knotted muscle. "Always worse in cold." Clara had helped Daniel with similar pains from farm work. She knew the value of heat and massage for old injuries. "I can help, if you'll let me." Taza studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Trust, she realized. They were building trust one small gesture at a time. As Clara worked on loosening the cramped muscles, she felt something fundamental shifting between them. The careful distance was dissolving, replaced by something warmer, more dangerous. When she finished, Taza caught her hand, holding it gently. "You good medicine woman," he said softly. "Just a farmer's wife who learned a few things." "No." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "More than that now." The moment stretched between them, fragile and full of possibility. Then Taza released her hand and rose to begin the work of digging them out. But that night, when darkness fell, he made his bed beside hers without comment, and Clara fell asleep to the sound of his breathing. No longer alone in the cold, the weeks after the blizzard brought a new rhythm to their shared existence. The snow had created deep drifts that made travel beyond the immediate vicinity of the cabin impossible, but within their small valley, Clara and Taza carved out pathways to the necessary places: the woodpile, the root cellar, the frozen creek where they chopped through ice for water. They hunted together now, Taza teaching Clara to read the signs of game in winter, the delicate track patterns of rabbits in fresh snow, the bark stripped from aspens where elk had fed, the wing marks where an owl had struck its prey. She learned to move silently on snowshoes he'd crafted from bent willow and sinew, to wait with perfect stillness in the bitter cold for the right moment to strike. Her first successful hunt came on a crystalline morning when the temperature made the snow squeak beneath their feet. A young deer, separated from its herd, had wandered into their valley seeking shelter. Clara held the bow Taza had made for her, feeling the tension in the string, remembering all his lessons about breath and patience. The arrow flew true, and the deer dropped cleanly. Clara felt a mixture of triumph and sorrow as they approached the fallen animal. Taza placed his hand on the deer's still warm flank and spoke words in Apache, a prayer of thanks. She understood now, for the life given to sustain life. "You did well," he said, and the pride in his voice warmed her more than any fire. They worked together to dress the kill, and that night they feasted on fresh venison seasoned with wild sage. The meat tasted of survival and partnership, of two people learning to move as one in a harsh world. As January deepened, their evening conversations grew longer and more intimate. Clara told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her father who'd been a clockmaker before the consumption took him, about meeting Daniel at a church social and believing love would be enough to overcome any hardship. "He wasn't a bad man," she said one night, watching the fire dance. "Just weak in some ways. The farm was failing, debts mounting. He'd inherited the bottle from his own father. I think some darkness that passed down through blood." Taza nodded slowly. "My grandfather also carried darkness, from when soldiers first came. Killed his brothers. He drank the white man's whiskey to forget. But whiskey only made remembering worse." They sat in companionable silence, understanding flowing between them without need for words. When Clara shivered, the cabin was warm enough, but memories brought their own chill. Taza pulled her against his side without hesitation. It had become natural now, this casual intimacy born of necessity and growing into something else. The day Clara found him making the necklace changed everything. She had been checking trap lines while Taza hunted larger game, returning earlier than expected when snow began falling heavily. She entered the cabin quietly, not wanting to disturb him if he'd returned and was resting. He sat by the fire, completely absorbed in his work, in his hands. A delicate creation was taking shape. Wolf teeth polished to gleaming white. interspersed with carved bone beads and the small, brilliant feathers of a red-tailed hawk. It was beautiful work, each element perfectly balanced, the kind of piece that would mark a woman as cherished, protected, claimed. Clara's breath caught, and Taza looked up, his hand stilling on the necklace. For a moment, neither moved. Then Clara found her voice. "It's beautiful," she said softly. For the bride you were supposed to have?" Taza set the necklace down carefully, his face unreadable. "For wife," he said simply. "Apache warrior gives this to woman he claims, shows all others she is his." Clara felt her heart constrict. Of course, he was still planning for the future, for the pure bride who would someday come to replace the damaged goods he'd been saddled with. She turned away, busying herself with removing her snow-covered cloak to hide the hurt in her eyes. "Clara." She didn't turn. "It's fine. I understand. I know what I am, what I'm not. Clara." His voice was firmer now, and she felt him rise, felt him cross the space between them. His hand settled on her shoulders, turning her gently to face him. "You think wrong thoughts." "Do I?" She met his eyes defiantly, tired of pretending the growing feelings between them were mere convenience. "You're making a wedding necklace, Taza, for a woman who deserves it, who can give you the future you need. I understand." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he would push her away. Instead, his hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "You still think you are broken thing," he said quietly. "Still think you are worth less because you knew love before, knew loss before. But Apache know truth. Woman who has walked through fire is stronger than one who has never felt flame." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "But you need—" "I need nothing that is not here." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "You think I make this for some shadow woman who might come? No, I make for woman who shares my fire, who learns my ways, who sings ghost songs in the darkness, who is already wife in all but ceremony." The world seemed to stop. Clara searched his face, afraid to hope. "Taza." "If you were still untouched maiden," he continued, his other hand coming up to frame her face, "would you know how to ease my pain? Would you know how to work beside me without words? Would you understand the weight of ghosts?" He shook his head slowly. "No. You are Clara who has lived, who has loved, who has lost. That makes you more, not less. But could you really accept a child that isn't yours by blood? If we, Apache, raise all children of tribe as their own, blood of father less important than teaching of father." His eyes bored into hers with intensity. "Your womb carried life before, can carry life again. That is gift, not curse." Clara was crying now, unable to stop the tears that had been building for weeks. Taza drew her against his chest, holding her as sobs shook her frame. Years of guilt, of self-blame, of feeling worthless poured out while he simply held her, solid and warm and real. When her tears finally subsided, Clara pulled back to look at him. His face was soft with something that might have been tenderness, might have been more. "If I wear your necklace," she said carefully, "I'm yours, truly. If you wear necklace, you are mine, I am yours. No shadows between us." He paused, vulnerability flickering across his features. "But only if Clara wants, not for trade, not for shelter, for choosing." Clara thought of all the reasons she shouldn't, the different worlds they came from, the judgment that would follow, the challenges ahead. Then she thought of waking beside him each morning, of the way his rare smiles transformed his face, of the patient hands that had nursed her through fever and taught her to survive. "For choosing," she repeated softly. Then, gathering her courage, "May I see it? The necklace." Taza retrieved it from beside the fire, holding it out for her inspection. Up close, she could see the hours of work in every element, each tooth carefully drilled, each bead carved with delicate symbols she couldn't read but somehow understood meant protection, fertility, belonging. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever made for me," she whispered. Not finished yet. Taza said, needs one more thing. He reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew something small. When he opened his palm, Clara gasped softly. It was a silver locket, tarnished with age but clearly precious. Inside, she glimpsed a tiny daguerreotype, a young Apache woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Morning stars, Taza explained. Only thing saved from burning. Want to add to necklace, if Clara permits. Past and present together. All our ghosts honored. Clara touched the locket gently, then looked up at him. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. That night, after they'd shared a meal and banked the fire, Taza formally presented her with the completed necklace. Clara sat before him, heart pounding, as he lifted her hair and fastened it around her throat. The weight of it was substantial but not heavy, a presence that marked her as chosen, as his. When he finished, his hands lingered on her shoulders. Clara turned to face him, and something electric passed between them. Without conscious thought, they moved together, lips meeting in their first kiss, tentative at first, then deeper as weeks of careful distance dissolved. When they finally drew apart, both breathing unsteadily, Taza rested his forehead against hers. My wife, he said softly in Apache, then in English. The words were a vow, a claiming, a promise. My husband, Clara replied, sealing their unconventional union. They made love that night with careful tenderness, two damaged souls finding wholeness in each other. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing their hidden valley in pristine white. Inside, wrapped in furs and each other, Clara and Taza began building a future neither had thought possible. When morning came, Clara woke to find Taza already awake, watching her with an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. She touched the necklace at her throat, felt Morningstar's locket warm against her skin, and smiled. They were no longer two separate griefs sharing a space. They were something new, forged in winter's crucible and sealed with understanding. The ghosts would always be with them, but now they had each other to face whatever came next. Spring came slowly to the mountains, first as a softening in the air, then as dark patches of earth showing through the snow where the sun struck warmest. Clara had never paid such close attention to the changing seasons before, but life with Taza had taught her to read the subtle signs, the way sap began to run in the pines, the return of certain bird calls, the shift in the wind's direction. It was on a morning in early April, as she knelt by the creek filling water buckets, that Clara first suspected. The nausea hit suddenly, forcing her to grip the bucket's edge as her stomach roiled. She'd felt queasy for several mornings now, but had attributed it to the change in diet as winter stores gave way to fresh spring greens. Now, counting back the weeks since her last monthly bleeding, a different possibility dawned. She pressed a hand to her belly, wonder and fear warring in her chest. After losing Emma, she'd believed that part of her life was over. The thought of carrying another child both thrilled and terrified her. She said nothing to Taza at first, wanting to be certain, but he watched her with those observant eyes, noting when she pushed away her morning meal, when she moved more carefully over rough ground. He didn't press, but she felt his attention like a physical touch. 2 weeks later, when she could no longer doubt the changes in her body, Clara found him working on a new bow in the afternoon sun. She settled beside him, gathering courage. I have something to tell you, she began, her voice barely steady. Taza set down his work, giving her his full attention. His face showed no surprise when she placed his hand on her still flat belly. I know, he said simply. Saw the signs. Waited for you to speak. How do you feel about it? Clara couldn't hide her anxiety. They'd never discussed children beyond that first night's acknowledgement of his need for heirs. Taza was quiet for a long moment, his hand warm against her stomach. When he spoke, his voice carried deep emotion. Feel like man who expected winter but found spring, grateful, humble, little bit scared. Clara laughed shakily. More than a little scared. For me. He gathered her against him, pressing his lips to her temple. We faced together. Apache women strong. Birth many babies in harder places than this. You have their strength now. But what if... Clara couldn't finish, couldn't voice the fear that haunted her. No what if, Taza said firmly. Only what is gift. We accept, we prepare, we welcome. As spring progressed into summer, their life adjusted around Clara's pregnancy. Taza became even more protective, insisting she rest during the heat of the day, taking over the heavier work. He gathered specific herbs and roots, preparing teas that he said would strengthen her and the baby. Some tasted bitter, but Clara drank them without complaint, trusting his knowledge. Their isolated peace was shattered on a blazing day in late June. Clara was tending the garden they'd planted, corn and beans in the Apache way, hardy vegetables that could withstand the mountain climate. Her belly had rounded noticeably, and she moved with the careful grace of a woman adjusting to her changing center. The sound of horses made her freeze. They never had visitors. No one knew of this hidden valley except, "Clara? Clara Whitmore, we know you're here." The voice was familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. Taza materialized from the forest, bow in hand, moving swiftly to put himself between her and the sound. 3 riders emerged from the tree line. Clara recognized the lead man with a sinking heart, Josiah Whitman, Bitter Creek's mayor, flanked by 2 younger men she didn't know. "Stay behind me," Taza murmured, but Clara stepped forward, chin raised. She would not hide. Whitman's eyes widened as he took in her appearance, the Apache dress she now wore, the necklace at her throat, the obvious swell of pregnancy beneath her clothes. His face shifted from surprise to something uglier. "My God, Clara, what has he done to you?" "Mr. Whitman," Clara said evenly. "Why are you here?" "Why?" The man seemed genuinely shocked. "To rescue you, of course. When that fellow came through saying he'd seen a white woman up here, looking like a captive, we had to come." "What fellow?" Taza's voice was dangerous. One of the younger men, barely out of his teens, spoke up eagerly. "Trapper named Josiah Reed. Said he saw her fetching water, dressed like a squaw." He caught himself, flushing. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, we figured you were being held against your will." Clara almost laughed at the absurdity. "As you can see, I'm perfectly well, and very much here by choice." Whitman's eyes fixed on her belly with undisguised disgust. "By choice? Look at yourself. Woman, you've gone native. Let this savage—" "Careful," Taza warned, stepping forward. The bow in his hands was still unstrung, but the threat was clear. "I am exactly where I choose to be," Clara said, her voice steel. "This is my husband. This is my home. We have the arrangement that was agreed upon, safe passage for your supply wagons in exchange for my presence here." "Nothing has changed." "Everything has changed," Whitman sputtered. "You were supposed to be a peace offering, not actually breed with him." Clara felt Taza tense beside her, his control hanging by a thread. She placed a calming hand on his arm. "I think you should leave," she said quietly. "Now." The youngest rider, a boy with kind eyes that reminded her painfully of Daniel in better days, spoke up hesitantly. "Ma'am, if you're truly happy, that is, if you're not being forced." "What's your name?" Clara asked gently. "Tom Morrison." "Ma'am, my PA captained the fort." "Well, Tom, I want you to look at me. Really look." She waited until the boy met her eyes. "Do I look mistreated? Starved? Beaten?" The boy studied her, taking in her healthy color, her clean clothes, the way she stood naturally close to Taza. "No, ma'am, you look content." "Because I am," Clara said simply. "For the first time since I lost my family, I am." Whitman made one last attempt. "Clara, think about what you're doing. That child you're carrying, it'll be a half-breed, belonging nowhere, welcomed by neither world. Is that what you want?" Clara's hand moved protectively to her belly. "This child will belong everywhere that matters. In its father's arms, at its mother's breast, in a home filled with love. That's more than many pure children have. You're making a mistake, Whitman said coldly. Don't expect help from Bitter Creek when this goes wrong. I expect nothing from Bitter Creek. Clara replied, I never did. Now please go, and don't come back. The men wheeled their horses, but Tom Morrison lingered a moment. Ma'am, should I tell folks you're well? Some worried, after the fire and all. Clara softened slightly. Tell anyone who truly cared that I'm well, that I've found peace. After they rode away, Clara began to shake. Taza guided her inside, settling her by the fire despite the day's warmth. They'll be back, she said. With more men, with soldiers maybe. Let them come, Taza said grimly. This is our land. We defend it. I won't have you die for me, Clara said fiercely. Not you too. Taza knelt before her, taking her hands. Not die for you. Live for you, for baby, for family we make. He touched her belly gently. But if they come to take you, I fight. No discussion. Clara pulled him close, breathing in his familiar scent. Then we'd better prepare. They spent the next weeks fortifying their position. Taza showed her hidden caves where she could shelter if needed, cached supplies in multiple locations, set up watching posts. But as summer wore on with no return of the riders, they began to relax slightly. Clara's pregnancy progressed normally, though she couldn't shake her anxiety completely. Sometimes she woke gasping from nightmares where flames consumed another child, another family. Each time, Taza held her until the shaking stopped, murmuring words in Apache she was beginning to understand, words of protection, of blessing, of fierce love. One evening in early August, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Clara felt the baby move for the first time. She gasped, grabbing Taza's hand and pressing it to the spot. His eyes widened as he felt the flutter of life beneath his palm. Strong, he said, wonder in his voice. Like little warrior already. Or warrior woman, Clara added, making him smile. Or warrior woman, he agreed. Either way, fighter, survivor, like parents. That night, Taza sang to her belly in Apache ancient songs of welcome and strength. Clara dozed to the sound, one hand tangled in his long hair, the other resting where their child grew. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The attack came 3 weeks later, but not in the form they'd expected. Clara would realize later that she should have known. Cowards always strike at what they perceive as the weakest point. She'd been checking her garden in the early morning, Taza having gone to scout the valley perimeter as was his daily custom. The shot came from the tree line, the bullet striking her shoulder and spinning her to the ground. Pain exploded through her, but her first thought was for the baby. She curled protectively around her belly as footsteps approached. Through tears of agony, she saw a face she recognized. Reed, the trapper who'd apparently started all this. Nothing personal, squaw woman, he said, raising his rifle again. But Whitman's paying good money to solve his Apache problem permanent-like. Figures without you. The savage'll move on, or do something stupid enough we can justify killing him. Clara tried to speak, to scream, but blood was filling her mouth. The world grayed at the edges. Then Taza was there, seeming to materialize from the very air. The trapper never had a chance to fire again. In seconds, Reed was on the ground, Taza's knife at his throat, but Taza didn't kill him. Instead, he knocked the man unconscious with brutal efficiency before turning to Clara. His face went ashen as he saw the blood. No, 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 he chanted, pressing his hands to the wound. Not again. Not you too. The baby! Clara gasped. Save the baby! Save both, Taza said fiercely. Must save both! Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of movement, of Taza's voice speaking urgently in Apache and English. She felt herself being lifted, carried swiftly but carefully. The pain in her shoulder had become a burning throb that radiated down her entire side, but she kept her other hand pressed protectively over her belly. When she next opened her eyes fully, she was lying on their bed of furs, and Taza was working over her wound with intense concentration. He'd removed the bullet. She saw it glinting darkly on a cloth beside him, and was packing the wound with something that smelled of pine and herbs. "Baby?" she managed to whisper. His hand stilled for a moment. "Baby moves. Feel it when I carry you, strong still." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by a fresh wave of pain as he resumed his work. She bit down on the leather strap he'd placed between her teeth, trying not to scream. "Bullet went through clean," Taza said, his voice carefully controlled. "No bones broken, but lost much blood." He met her eyes, and she saw fear there. "Must be strong. Clara, must fight." She nodded weakly, then remembered the trapper. "Reed?" "Tied up. Deal with later." His jaw was rigid with suppressed fury. "Now, only you matter." For the next 2 days, Clara fought. The wound itself was clean, but she'd lost significant blood, and her body was already taxed from pregnancy. Fever came and went in waves. Taza never left her side, spooning broth and herbal tea between her lips, changing her bandages, talking to her constantly to keep her anchored to consciousness. On the 3rd morning, Clara woke clear-headed to find sunlight streaming through the window, and Taza asleep sitting up beside the bed, her hand clutched in his. His face was haggard, dark circles under his eyes, several days' growth of beard shadowing his jaw. She squeezed his hand gently, and his eyes flew open, instantly alert. "Clara?" Hope and fear warred in his expression. "I'm here," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "We're here." His composure cracked then. He pressed her hand to his lips, shoulders shaking with silent sobs of relief. Clara had never seen him cry before, and it broke her heart even as it filled it. "Thought I'd lose you," he said roughly. "Like Morning Star, like everyone, could not—" He stopped, unable to continue. "I'm too stubborn to die," Clara said softly. "A tempting lightness." "You should know that by now." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, stubborn white woman, good thing." She felt the baby shift inside her, a strong rolling motion, and guided Taza's hand to feel it. "See, we're fighters, both of us." Over the next days, as Clara slowly regained strength, Taza told her what had transpired. He'd sent Reed back to Bitter Creek with a message. Any further attempts on their lives would result in the closing of the pass and retribution against the town. He'd kept the man's rifle and horse as payment for the attack. "Should have killed him," Taza said darkly. Clara shook her head. "No, you showed mercy. That matters." She paused, gathering courage for what needed to be said. "But we can't stay here." Taza's face hardened. "This is our home. This is our battleground." Clara corrected gently. "As long as we're here, there will always be another Reed, another Whitman, another reason for violence. I won't raise our child in constant fear." "Where would we go?" The question seemed torn from him. "This land is my blood." "I know." Clara reached up to touch his face. "But sometimes we must leave what we love to save what we love more." He was quiet for a long time, wrestling with truths he didn't want to accept. Finally, he asked, "Where?" Clara had been thinking about this as she recovered. "North into Colorado territory, maybe farther, places where people are too busy surviving to care about Apache white marriages, where our child can grow without always looking over their shoulder." "I know nothing of those places." "You knew nothing of loving a white woman once," Clara pointed out. "You learned. We'll learn together." As August turned to September and Clara's belly grew heavy with child, they began preparing for departure. It went against every instinct Taza had to leave his ancestral lands. But he'd made his choice. Clara and their unborn child came before everything else. They worked together to preserve meat for travel, to pack what they could carry, to decide what must be left behind. Clara watched Taza struggle with each item, knowing he was saying goodbye to more than just objects. One evening, she found him on the ridge above their valley, looking out over the mountains painted purple and gold by sunset. She settled beside him, taking his hand. "Tell me what you see," she said softly. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, See my grandfather's hunting grounds. See where my father taught me to track elk. See the peak where boys become warriors." His voice roughened. "See the smoke from burning lodges. Hear the cries of children running from soldiers." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "I'm so sorry." "See also where I find you," he continued. "Where we make love first time. Where baby grows strong. Where Apache warrior learns white woman's heart is same as Apache heart. Beats, breaks, heals." Clara leaned against him, feeling their child move restlessly. "We'll tell the baby about this place, all of it, the beauty and the sorrow." "Yes," Taza placed his hand over hers on her belly. "Tell baby about mountains that touch sky, about grandmother's prayers still living in wind, about how love grows even in rocky ground." They sat in silence as stars began to appear, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Taza spoke again. "I need one thing before we go." "What?" "Marry you in white man's way too, so no one can say you are not true wife, so child has no questions." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "How? There's no preacher who would—" "Tom Morrison's father, captain at fort, has power to marry. Is good man. I watch him. Learn him. He will do this." Clara thought of the young soldier who'd shown kindness, who'd asked if she was well. Perhaps his father would share that compassion. "All right," she agreed. "But I go as I am, wearing your necklace, carrying your child. No pretending to be something we're not. Would not want pretending," Taza said firmly. "Want truth." 2 weeks later, they stood in Captain Morrison's simple office at Fort Defiance. Clara wore her best dress, a green calico Taza had traded for specifically for this occasion, with the Apache necklace displayed proudly at her throat. Her pregnancy was unmistakable now, the baby due within the month. Captain Morrison was indeed his son's father, a weathered man with kind eyes who'd seen too much frontier violence to judge harshly. His wife stood as witness, a small woman with prematurely gray hair who surprised Clara by taking her hands warmly. "I lost a daughter to fever last year, Mrs. Morrison whispered. "I understand choosing love over convention when life is so uncertain." The ceremony was brief but legal. When Captain Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, Taza kissed Clara with gentle reverence, his hand resting on her belly where their child kicked vigorously. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Redhawk," the captain said, filling out the marriage certificate with careful precision. "May I ask where you're headed?" "North." Taza answered simply, "New start. Good luck to you both." Morrison handed them the certificate, and to the little one. As they prepared to leave, Tom Morrison approached. He pressed something into Clara's hand, a small leather pouch. "From some folks in Bitter Creek who wanted you to know they wish you well," he said. "Not everyone agrees with Whitman." Inside the pouch were several gold coins and a note in shaky handwriting. "For the baby. From those who remember kindness. Be happy." Clara had to blink back tears. Even in a place that had brought such sorrow, there were good people. They left the next morning, just as dawn was breaking over the mountains. 2 horses, packed carefully with everything they could carry. Clara rode slowly, her advanced pregnancy making travel uncomfortable, but she didn't complain. At the valley's entrance, Taza stopped. He dismounted and knelt, pressing his palm to the earth. He spoke in Apache, a long flow of words Clara could only partially understand. A farewell, a promise, a prayer. When he rose, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Now we go," he said simply. Clara reached down to touch his shoulder. "We'll come back someday, when it's safe, when the world is different." "Maybe," Taza said, swinging back onto his horse. "Maybe our children come back, find the old places, remember." They rode north as the sun climbed higher, leaving the valley that had sheltered their unlikely love. Clara didn't look back. She'd learned that dwelling on what was lost only made the journey harder. Instead, she focused on what lay ahead. Unknown territories, new challenges, and somewhere, a place where their child could grow up belonging to both worlds that had created it. 3 days into their journey, the first birth pains began. Clara gasped, clutching her saddle horn as the contraction rolled through her. Taza was beside her instantly. "Baby comes?" "I think so," Clara panted. "We need to find shelter." His face was calm, but she saw the concern in his eyes. They were miles from any settlement, in unfamiliar country. This was not how either of them had planned it. But then, nothing about their love had gone according to plan. Taza found them shelter in a grove of cottonwoods beside a clear stream, working with desperate efficiency to create a safe space for Clara to labor. He spread their blankets and furs beneath the largest tree, whose golden leaves whispered in the early autumn breeze. The contractions were coming steadily now, each one forcing Clara to grip his hand until her knuckles went white. "Should have stayed put," she gasped between pains. "Should have waited." "No," Taza said firmly, wiping sweat from her brow with a damp cloth. "Baby chooses time. We adapt." He'd delivered foals and calves, had been present when his sister birthed her children back when the world still held his whole family. But this was Clara, his heart walking outside his body, carrying their future. His hands, so steady with bow and knife, trembled slightly as he helped her into a more comfortable position. The labor stretched through the day and into evening. Clara fought through each wave of pain with the same quiet determination she'd shown learning to survive in the mountains. When she grew tired, Taza sang the Apache birthing songs his mother had taught him, his voice weaving strength around her. Just as the first stars appeared, Clara felt the overwhelming urge to push. Taza positioned himself to help deliver their child, his face a mask of concentration. "I see the head," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Dark hair, like mine. Push, beloved. Bring our child into this world." Clara bore down with everything she had left, a primal cry escaping her lips. Then suddenly, miraculously, a small body slipped into Taza's waiting hands. The baby's first cry pierced the evening air, strong, indignant, very much alive. "A son," Taza breathed, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "We have a son." He cleaned the baby gently and placed him on Clara's chest. The infant quieted immediately, nuzzling against her skin. Clara wept as she traced his tiny features, the distinctive Apache cheekbones softened by her European heritage, a shock of black hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they were gray like hers. "He's perfect," she whispered. "Look what we made." Taza wrapped them both in his arms, creating a cocoon of warmth and protection. "What name?" he asked softly. They discussed this during the quiet evenings in their valley. The child would need names from both worlds, armor against those who would question his belonging. "Samuel Dakota Redhawk," Clara said. "Samuel for my father, Dakota for friend to everyone," Taza finished, nodding approval. "Good name, strong name." They spent 3 days in the cottonwood grove, Taza hunting and standing guard while Clara recovered and nursed their son. Samuel was a good baby, nursing strongly and sleeping peacefully between feedings. But they couldn't linger. Autumn was advancing, and they needed to find winter shelter. On the 4th day, they resumed their journey. Clara rode with Samuel secured against her chest in a cradle board Taza had crafted. The rhythmic movement of the horse seemed to soothe the baby, who slept contentedly as they traveled. They were following an old trader's trail north when they encountered the wagon train. Clara heard them first, the creak of wheels, the lowing of oxen, voices carrying on the wind. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle Taza had taught her to use, while he moved his horse slightly ahead, positioning himself between his family and potential danger. The lead wagon came around the bend, driven by a weathered man with intelligent eyes. He pulled up short at the sight of them, an Apache warrior, a white woman with a native necklace, and an infant that was clearly both. For a moment, no one moved. Then the wagon driver did something unexpected. He smiled. "Well now," he said in a voice flavored with German accent, "you folks look like you could use a hot meal and some company. I'm Heinrich Muller, This is my family and neighbors. Heading to Colorado Territory to farm." Taza remained wary, but Clara sensed no threat from the man. "We're traveling the same direction," she said carefully. "But we don't want trouble." Muller's eyes took in the wedding band on Clara's finger, the protective way Taza positioned himself, the baby sleeping peacefully. "No trouble from us, ma'am. We've got our own mixed families here. My son married a Mexican girl. The Johnsons adopted 2 Indian orphans. Out here, family is what you make it." And so, unexpectedly, they found themselves welcomed into the small wagon train. There were 5 families in all, each fleeing something or seeking something better. The women especially took Clara under their wing, cooing over Samuel and sharing advice about babies and travel. "Such beautiful gray eyes," Maria Muller said, bouncing Samuel gently while Clara helped prepare the evening meal. "My first one had eyes that color, changed to brown by his first birthday, but some keep them." Taza remained more aloof, but the men respected his hunting skills when he brought in fresh game to share. Hans Muller, Heinrich's eldest son, tried out his limited Apache vocabulary, learned from trading posts, making Taza actually smile when he mangled the pronunciation terribly. They traveled together for 2 weeks. Safety in numbers and shared purpose. Around the campfires, stories were exchanged. Clara learned that the Mullers had fled religious persecution in the old country, that the Johnsons had lost their own children to scarlet fever before adopting their 2 Apache orphans, that the other families carried their own griefs and hopes. "You see," Heinrich said one evening, gesturing around the fire where children of various colors played together while their parents talked. "This is America's future. Not the hate, not the wars, but this, people choosing to be family." It was during a stop to repair a broken wagon wheel that disaster nearly struck again. Clara had walked to the nearby stream to wash Samuel's wrappings, the baby secure in his cradleboard propped against a tree. She was kneeling by the water when she heard horses approaching fast, too fast. 3 riders burst from the tree line, rough men with the look of those who lived outside any law. Clara scrambled for the rifle she'd foolishly left with the cradleboard. But one rider was already dismounting, moving toward Samuel. Well, what have we here? A little half-breed papoose." The man's grin was ugly. "Fetch a good price in certain places. Curiosity like that." "Don't touch him!" Clara launched herself at the man, all maternal fury. He backhanded her casually, sending her sprawling. She heard Samuel begin to cry, heard the man laugh, and then heard something else, a sound like angry wind through trees. Taza's war cry split the air as he came flying from nowhere, tackling the man away from their son. The fight was brutal but brief. The other 2 riders went for their guns, but the Muller men had heard the commotion. Hans took one down with a rifle shot to the shoulder, while Heinrich held the 3rd at gunpoint. Taza had the first man pinned, knife at his throat, every muscle trembling with the need to kill. The man had touched his child, struck his wife. Apache law was clear on the response to such violations. "Taza," Clara said softly, holding Samuel close. The baby was crying but unharmed. "He's not worth it. We have too much to lose." For a moment, she thought he wouldn't listen. Then, slowly, Taza pulled back, but he leaned close to the man's ear, speaking in a voice that carried deadly promise. "You live because she asks, but I mark you now." His knife moved quickly, leaving a deep cut on the man's cheek that would scar. "All will know you as one who threatens children. If I see you again, or hear you have hurt any child, any woman, I will find you, and she will not be there to save you." The men were sent on their way, wounded and warned. The wagon train moved on quickly after that, everyone more vigilant. But something had shifted. The other families had seen Taza's fierce protection of his family, had witnessed Clara's desperate courage, had watched them choose mercy over vengeance. "You're good people," Johnson said simply that evening, as his 2 adopted Apache boys played peekaboo with Samuel. "That's all that matters." They parted ways from the wagon train at the Colorado Territory border. The Muellers and others were heading to established farming communities. But Taza and Clara sought something more remote, more private. There's an old trading post about 50 miles northwest, Heinrich told them, run by a man named Patrick O'Brien. Lost his Apache wife to cholera a few years back, but he's fair-minded. Might know of land where you could settle peaceful-like. They found O'Brien exactly where Heinrich had said, a grizzled Irishman with bright blue eyes and a limp from an old arrow wound. His trading post was a sturdy log building that served the scattered homesteaders and remaining native bands in the region. Red Hawk, you said. O'Brien studied them shrewdly. Heard that name before? Warrior who held Eagle Pass down south? Taza nodded warily. Also heard you married proper-like and left peaceful. Good for you, boyo. War's a young man's game, and you've got better things to protect now. He leaned over to look at Samuel, who was awake and gurgling. Fine-looking lad. Got his Da's look about him, but his ma's eyes. I see. We need land, Clara said. Somewhere we can build. Raise our family without trouble. O'Brien was quiet for a moment, then made a decision. Got a place in mind. About 20 miles north. Little valley with good water. Sheltered. Belonged to my wife's cousins, but they moved on after the troubles. Cabin's still standing. Needs work, but it's solid. Land's no good for large farming, but it'll support a family knows how to live simple. He drew them a map, marking landmarks and water sources. I'll spread word you're under my protection, for what it's worth. Most folks around here mind their own business anyway. You don't bother them, they won't bother you. As they prepared to leave, O'Brien pressed a package into Clara's hands. Baby blanket my Mary started before she passed. Never got to finish it. Seems right it should go to good use. The blanket was beautifully woven. Apache patterns in Irish wool. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. Well, we're all just trying to make our way, aren't we? Apache, Irish, or anywhere in between. They found the valley just as O'Brien had described, a hidden jewel with a clear creek, good grazing, and timber for building. The cabin was small but sound, needing only minor repairs. As Clara stood in the doorway, Samuel sleeping in her arms, she felt something she hadn't experienced since before the fire, hope for a real future. Home? Taza asked, coming to stand beside her. Clara looked up at him, this man who'd given up his mountains for her, who'd learned to walk in her world as she'd learned to walk in his. Home, she confirmed. That night, as they lay on a bed of furs in their new cabin, Samuel safe between them, Taza sang softly in Apache, a song of new beginnings, of seeds planted in foreign soil that grow strong despite the strangeness. Clara added her voice to his, humming a harmony she'd learned in their mountain valley. Outside, the unfamiliar stars of their new home sparkled overhead, witnessing another chapter in their unlikely love story. They'd fought for this, through prejudice and violence, through loss and fear. Now, finally, they had a chance to simply live. The seasons turned gently in their hidden valley. Samuel grew from a baby to a sturdy toddler, taking his first steps on a crisp autumn morning when the aspens blazed gold. He had his mother's gray eyes that sparkled with mischief, and his father's quiet intensity when focused on something interesting, usually insects or small animals that ventured near the cabin. Clara and Taza built their life with careful deliberation. They expanded the cabin, adding a room for Samuel and another that would someday house more children. The garden grew each year, incorporating both Apache crops and varieties Clara remembered from Ohio. Taza hunted and trapped, trading furs at O'Brien's post for supplies they couldn't make or grow themselves. Word of their presence spread slowly through the scattered community. At first, people were wary. A white woman married to an Apache was still unusual, even in this frontier melting pot. But Clara's healing skills, learned from both her former life and Taza's teachings, gradually won acceptance. When the Johnson family's adopted son broke his arm, it was Clara who said it properly. When whooping cough threatened the Muller grandchildren during a visit, her herbal remedies helped ease their suffering. Taza took longer to be accepted, but his actions spoke louder than any words. When wolves threatened the Martinez family's sheep, he tracked the pack and drove them off without killing them. showing respect for the predators while protecting the livelihood of his neighbors. When drought struck one summer, he showed several families where to find hidden springs his people had used for generations. It was little Samuel who truly bridged the gap between worlds. The boy was fearless and friendly, approaching everyone with the same open curiosity. He chattered in a mixture of English and Apache, switching between languages with the fluid ease of the truly bilingual. The other children were fascinated by him, and through the children, the adults learned to see past old prejudices. 3 years after their arrival, Clara stood in their expanded garden, watching Samuel help his father plant corn in the Apache way, fish heads buried deep to nourish the soil, beans planted to climb the stalks. Her hand rested on her belly, where their second child grew. This pregnancy felt different from the first, calmer, without the undercurrent of fear that had marked Samuel's gestation. "Mama, look," Samuel called, holding up a worm he'd discovered. "Can I keep?" "Worms stay in the garden, sweet one," Clara said. "They help the plants grow." Samuel considered this seriously, then carefully placed the worm back in the soil. "Grow big corn," he told it solemnly in Apache. That evening, as they sat on the porch Taza had built, Clara told him about the letter she'd received at O'Brien's post. It had taken over a year to reach her, forwarded through multiple hands. "It's from the minister's wife in Bitter Creek," she said, unfolding the worn paper. "Martha Patterson. She writes that Whitman died last winter. Apoplexy. She says his son has taken over as mayor, and things are different." Taza's expression remained neutral, but she felt him tense beside her. "Different how?" Clara read from the letter. "Young Robert Whitman served in the cavalry and saw too much bloodshed. He seeks reconciliation where his father sought domination. Several Apache families have returned to trade freely. He speaks often of the need to heal old wounds." "Words are easy," Taza said quietly. "She also writes." Clara paused, emotion thickening her voice. "They've put a marker on Emma and Daniel's graves. Beloved daughter and husband of Clara Whitmore Redhawk. May their memory be a blessing." Taza pulled her close, understanding the weight of that acknowledgement, to be claimed publicly, to have her lost family honored despite her choices. It was more than she'd dared hope. "Perhaps someday we visit," he said. "When ready, when safe." "Perhaps," Clara agreed, though she wasn't sure she'd ever be ready to face those ghosts directly. As summer ripened into fall, their second child arrived with considerably less drama than the first. This time they were prepared, settled, surrounded by a community that had become chosen family. Maria Muller served as midwife, with her daughter-in-law assisting, while Taza kept Samuel occupied outside. The baby was a girl, with Clara's delicate features and Taza's dark eyes. They named her Rose Morningstar Redhawk, Rose for the flower that grew wild near their cabin despite the altitude, Morningstar for the one who couldn't be forgotten. Samuel was enchanted with his sister, constantly wanting to hold her, sing to her, share his treasures with her. "My baby," he announced proudly to anyone who would listen. The valley began to attract others like them, people who didn't fit neatly into the categories society tried to impose. A freed slave named Marcus Washington and his Cheyenne wife settled on the eastern edge. A Chinese doctor named Li Wei, driven from the mining camps by violence, built a small clinic with his Mexican partner. 2 sisters from Sweden established a small school, welcoming any child regardless of heritage. Clara became the unofficial chronicler of their small community, writing letters and keeping records. She helped the children with their lessons, teaching them to read and write in English while learning their languages in return. The schoolhouse became a babel of tongues: Apache, Spanish, Mandarin, Swedish, and more, but somehow the children understood each other perfectly. One winter evening, when Samuel was 6 and Rose 3, a familiar figure appeared at their door. Tom Morrison, no longer the young soldier, but now a lieutenant, stood on their porch in civilian clothes. "Mrs. Redhawk," he said, removing his hat. "Mr. Redhawk, I hope I'm not intruding." They invited him in warily, but Tom quickly explained his purpose. "I've left the army," he said. Seen too much I can't reconcile with my conscience. I remembered you folks, how you found a different way. I'm heading further west, but I wanted to stop and, well, to apologize for being part of what drove you from your home." Samuel, ever curious, approached the stranger. "You know Mama and Papa?" Tom smiled at the boy. "I did. Young man, your parents showed me that courage comes in many forms." They fed him dinner, and Tom told them news of the wider world, of changes coming, of old hatred slowly giving way to new understanding in some places, even as they hardened in others. Before he left the next morning, he pressed a package into Clara's hands. "From people in Bitter Creek who remember you kindly," he said. "For the children." Inside were books, primers and stories, slates and chalk, and a set of colored pencils that made Samuel's eyes go wide with delight. As spring arrived, the community decided to hold a celebration. Part Easter, part Apache blessing ceremony, part harvest festival borrowed from various traditions. It was a glorious hodgepodge of cultures, with foods and songs and stories from every corner of the world represented in their small valley. Clara watched from the doorstep as Samuel raced around with the other children, his little sister toddling determinedly after him. Taza stood with the men, demonstrating how to string a bow to Marcus Washington's son, while Li Wei and Heinrich Muller argued good-naturedly about the best way to smoke meat. "You did this," Taza said later, coming to sit beside her as the celebration wound down. "Built this place where all are welcome." "We did this," Clara corrected, "by choosing each other, by refusing to let hate win, by showing there was another way." Rose had fallen asleep in her lap, thumb in mouth, worn out from trying to keep up with the bigger children. Samuel was fighting sleep, curled against his father's side, still clutching the corn-husk doll one of the Apache grandmothers had made for him. "Sometimes I think about Eagle Pass," Taza said quietly. "The mountains, the old places. Wonder if the spirits of our ancestors are angry that I left." Clara reached for his hand. "I think they understand. We carry them with us, in the stories we tell, the traditions we keep, the love we show our children. The place matters less than the memory." He squeezed her hand. "Wise woman. How did Apache warrior get so lucky?" "Clean living and good looks," Clara said with a straight face, making him laugh, that rare, rich sound she treasured. As the stars came out, families began drifting home. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would always be those who couldn't accept their mixed community, always be forces that threatened their hard-won peace. But tonight, they were safe. Tonight, they were home. Clara penned a final entry in her journal that evening. 7 years ago, I thought my life had ended in flames. I was wrong. It had only transformed, like metal in a forge, into something stronger and more beautiful than I could have imagined. In seeking to escape my ghosts, I found my future. In exile, I found belonging. In a stranger's arms, I found home. Our children will grow up between worlds, citizens of all and none. Some will call them half-breeds, but I see them as bridges, living proof that love transcends the boundaries others would build. They carry the blood of warriors and farmers, the heritage of ancient mountains and distant shores. They are America's true children, born of its pain but raised in hope. The fire still haunts my dreams sometimes. I still see Emma's face, hear Daniel's voice. But alongside the ghosts walk the living, Taza's steady presence, Samuel's laughter, Rose's sweet babble, the voices of neighbors who have become family. We are none of us unburdened by the past, but we choose not to be defined by it. Tomorrow, Taza will take Samuel hunting for the first time, teaching him as his father once taught him. I will work with Rose in the garden, showing her which plants heal and which harm. As my mother once showed me, the threads of our separate histories weave together into something new, something uniquely ours. This is our love story, not the tale I expected to live, but the one that found me anyway, born of tragedy, tested by prejudice, strengthened by adversity, and ultimately triumphant in its simple domesticity. We are the Redhawks of Hidden Valley, and this is our home. As Clara closed her journal, she heard Taza singing softly to the children, an Apache lullaby she'd learned to love. She joined her voice to his, harmonizing as they'd learned to do in all things. Outside, the mountains stood eternal guard, holding their small valley like a cupped palm, protecting this fragile experiment in hope and human resilience. The fire that had once destroyed everything had ultimately forged something unbreakable, a love that transcended loss, a family that defied convention, a future bright with possibility. And in that transformed life, Clara found not just survival, but joy. Thank you for joining us around the campfire for this tale of love and survival in the Old West. If you're listening to this story, we'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just like Clara and Taza connected across cultures. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of frontier romance and adventure. Share your thoughts about Clara and Taza's journey in the comments. Did their love story touch your heart as much as it touched mine? Until next time, partners, keep those campfires burning and those hearts open to unexpected love.